Good evening, everybody. Welcome here, Converge Media Studios. My name is Omari Salisbury, and yeah, we got a special report. Last time we did a special report here with Kevin Schofield was when what was that? Was that Meyerberg?
Yeah, it was. We had Andrew Marburg. We were talking about the OPA ruling. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, welcome Kevin Schofield back here to Converge Media Studios. Kevin Schofield from SCCinsight, and today was a really big day when we talk about the inquest process here in King County. And I'll let you take it from there.
Yeah. So inquest process is how the county. It's a sort of statewide rule about how a county looks into cases where there is a death of somebody caused by police officers. It's a process used for some other things too, but that's sort of the main one we care about today. In 2017, there were 10 deaths in King County at the hands of law enforcement, including Isaiah Obet, Damarius Butts, and of course, Charleena Lyles. And there, of course, have been many more since then in 2018, 2019, and last year. Under state law, inquests are the responsibility of the county executive, and it's what they call a quasi-judicial arrangement. It's not like a criminal trial, even though they have a jury. There's no conviction at the end of it, but it's kind of a fact-finding way to look at the case of somebody who was killed by the police and understand what happened, maybe find out a little bit about why that happened, and at some level decide sort of was there something criminal that happened in the course of that by the police action. So when they were gearing up in late 2017 for the inquests around some of these cases, there was a lot of feedback to King County Executive Dow Constantine that there were some real problems with the process that King County was using. So he started up an inquest review panel that gave him a bunch of feedback. Various other stakeholders gave him a bunch of feedback too. And then he issued in 2018 an executive order with a new set of rules around how King County inquest should be handled. And that turned out to be kind of controversial.
Actually, we talked to County Executive Constantine just about 1 year ago and talked to him about this process. Katrina Johnson, who is Charleena Lyles' cousin and family spokesperson, had come on our show probably a week or two before and talked about how the process was jammed up. And we invited Dow Constantine onto the Morning Update show. There's a clip here. It's about 3 minutes, but this is Executive Constantine last year talking about the inquest process.
So the inquest is the medical examiner's inquest. So it's essentially the coroner's report. And fundamentally, it is designed to just ask who, what, when, where, and what we want to find out is why. And previously it was conducted by the district court, even though they were doing it just voluntarily. It's not part of their duties. And the case was presented by the county prosecutor. Families came to us. There was an upsurge in police-involved deaths. a couple years ago, and families came to us and said they didn't have faith in the outcome of these proceedings. And I guess if I can just distill down the real problem that was happening is like the officer that was involved was always being asked, did you fear for your life? And the answer, of course, was always yes. And then the press would take that and report, well, it's justified because the officer feared for his or her life. But that's not actually the standard, right? And especially now with the adoption of the new law, is supposed to be what a reasonable officer based on training would do. And what we wanted the question to be is not, did you subjectively fear for your life, possibly because of the deep-seated biases that we all carry around with us, and I mean we all carry around with us, but was your action consistent with your training? Did this happen because your training was wrong, because the policies were wrong, or because what you did departed from what you were trained to do? And in either case, how can we get the agency then to fix that so the tragedy doesn't repeat itself as it has over and over and over again? And we went through with families and some representatives of police and created an entirely new process. A new process that involved not the prosecutor, but outside counsel and staff bringing the facts in. A process that involved hiring not the district court, but other presiding officers. A process that the families involved could have much more faith in because they helped create it, and that wouldn't lead to that misleading conclusion at the end about whether you feared for your life. And we were immediately, I signed this into law as an executive order, sued by the city of Auburn and Federal Way and Kent and Seattle and the King County Sheriff's Office. Like I said, I'm not the boss of them. And all of them to say that we were outside of our authority, that we shouldn't be asking these questions. We are fighting that in court right now. We should have an answer within 20 days. Some of the families have also raised the issue of whether the jury in the case should be able to have a finding of some criminal liability or that a criminal act occurred. And that has historically, by case law, not been allowed in the state of Washington, but the court is being asked to review that. And so several of the families, some of whom are represented by our own public defense department, are asking for that. And that should all be available to us within a few weeks. And then I hope that people will not take this on appeal, but they'll allow us to proceed with the many inquests that need to happen so families can get some answers.
All right, so that was about 1 year ago, and actually we'll put the link to that full interview there in the comments. So you heard Executive Constantine back in July of 2020. How does this all shake out?
Yeah, there was a little bit of spin in there. He definitely had his views as to sort of what the scope of an inquest should be, who gets to, what evidence should be allowed, who should get to testify, what kind of answers is it, and he's built all that in. And, the one thing he did point out correctly is basically everybody sued. After he issued these executive orders, everybody sued. The families of victims sued, police officers who were involved in these inquests and these incidents, law enforcement agencies, including King County Sheriff, City of Seattle, Auburn, Kent, Federal Way. It was a bunch of different cases that all got sort of consolidated together as it went up to appeal. State Supreme Court handled them all together in one big 49-page ruling today. There were really, I think, sort of 7 big questions that were tied up in this. Let me just spit them out there real quick.
Real quick, before you go into the 7,
Yeah.
because you mentioned Seattle, but then also Seattle withdrew, right? Or did it?
Yeah. So what happened was Seattle sued as well, and then there was an enormous amount of pressure from the Seattle City Council and from community advocates put on the city attorney's office, and they ended up withdrawing from it. So today they were not actually a party to the suit, but they were originally a party to the suit. But basically the other cities continued on with the issues that they raise, the challenges that they raise. And so just to give away a little bit of the ending, pretty much everything the city of Seattle asked for, the state Supreme Court denied today. So mostly the city of Seattle would have lost on everything that they asked for today. So some of the big questions that were up to the state Supreme Court to answer today. First of all, can the county executive decide the rules of inquest by executive order? And that was something that Constantine mentioned a little bit there. Can police officers be subpoenaed and forced to testify? And that was something where Constantine wrote an executive order that police officers may not be subpoenaed and forced to testify. And, but then there's sort of follow-on question too, which is if they're forced to testify, can they just invoke the Fifth Amendment and their right to not incriminate themselves just as a blanket way of not testifying at all? Can the chief of police testify or the head of whatever, the sheriff, the head of whatever law enforcement agency, can they testify on what training the officers get and the policies of the department? Because that comes up in questions like, were they following the policies and training that they were supposed to be doing, or did they go off script and do their own thing, right? And sort of along those lines about sort of what testimony is allowed. Can expert witnesses testify on whether officers complied with that training and policies? Can officers testify as to their own mental state? And Constantine made a big deal out of that in there, right? Because officers want to be able to say, here's what I was thinking at the time, but that could potentially prejudice the outcome of it. Although, to be quite honest, the juries are given instructions on how to think about this stuff, and I don't quite buy into Constantine's notion that, let's blame it on the press. The press go report the wrong thing, thus we must change the rules about an inquest. I'm not bought into that. Can the jury try to decide issues of criminal fault or liability? And there is a place where Constantine had a lot of spin in there. He's like, nah, this is about what were the facts and what really happened and how can we change processes so these things never happen again. And the families rightly said, hey, should they be looking at, if they find something that seems like it's criminal activity, should they be able to raise that as well too? What does the state law say about that? Does the county executive, such as Dow, have the right to appoint what he called an inquest administrator, basically appoint somebody to run the inquest on his behalf, who essentially would be a political appointee, and what they say, that's an at-will employee, which means Constantine would be able to fire them at will. And does that create sort of a conflict with the appearance of fairness if it's a political appointee who could sort of have political influence on them? And then county executive order inquest proceedings to be open to the public. Constantine did that, and some people didn't like that so much. And then just finding this question of, under state law, inquests are supposed to happen within 18 months. And particularly for the 2017 ones, it's been a lot longer than 18 months. Are they still what they call timely? Are they allowed to continue on?
Yeah, I mean, and these families very, very frustrated with the process. This was actually a short clip here of Charleena Johnson 1 year ago talking about how all the cities that you mentioned joined into this lawsuit and how families have been waiting for their inquest.
Federal Way, Auburn, Kent are holding up the process with their lawsuits so that not only my family doesn't get to know what happened to their loved one, but neither will the Yosia Falatongo family, neither will Jesse Saray, neither will Sean Fuhr, neither will so many other people that are still waiting. There are at least 30 plus families waiting on an inquest.
All right, so Kevin, what's the heart of it today?
All right, so let's get to, here's what the court said today. And they are, the definitive court in the state of Washington, so there's no more really appeals up from here. Can the county executive decide the rules of inquest by executive order? The Supreme Court said, yeah, state law says that inquests are run by the county executive, but if he writes the rules for them, they still have to follow state law, and that's where some of the issues that later sort of come in places where he didn't really follow state law. Can police officers be subpoenaed and forced to testify? And this is really sort of a big deal. And it raises an issue that the court sort of made a big point of today and kept coming back to. And so here's what the state law says. I'm just going to read you a section of it. The coroner must summon and examine as witnesses, on oath administered by the coroner, every person who, in his or her opinion or that of any of the jury, has knowledge of the facts. And they really emphasize this, every person, right? Constantine, by putting in his executive order that they can't subpoena police officers, was making an exception to that. And the Supreme Court said, nope, every person. Yes, they absolutely can, and essentially have to subpoena the police officers, right? And then they went on to say, on this question of, can they invoke the Fifth Amendment? They said, well, they can't invoke the Fifth Amendment sort of as a blanket, I'm going to take the Fifth Amendment on everything, therefore, don't even bother calling me to testify because I'm going to call it. They say, no, a police officer, still has the right to not incriminate themselves, but they have to invoke that on a question-by-question basis. They don't have the right to say, no, I'm not going to answer any questions, okay? So there's that. Can the chief of police testify on officer training and department policies? Every person. Came back to every person again. Yeah, chief of police, head law enforcement can testify on that.
Was the chief exempt before?
Well, so this comes back to the law enforcement agencies, along with sort of wanting police officers to be able to testify to their mental state, wanted to be able to sort of contextualize the officer's actions by saying, okay, here's what the policy says, here's what their training says. See, they were following policy and training, right? And certainly the officers and the officers wanted that as well. They wanted that kind of air cover. And we heard Constantine talking about how, he wanted to make sure that the outcome wasn't sort of prejudiced by these sort of authoritative people saying, here's what sort of the facts and the training are of this. But again, the state Supreme Court said every person, right? Every person with knowledge of the facts, the inquest must summon them to talk about this. So yes, they can. Can they have expert witnesses talking about whether they complied with that training and policy? Yes, every person, right? It's sort of this common theme through this thing. Does the jury try to decide issues of criminal fault liability? You heard Constantine trying to say, no, that's not really what inquests are about. And state Supreme Court said, we disagree. And they quoted another part of state law where they said, that says, and this is, again, quoting the state law, after hearing the testimony, the jury shall render its verdict and certify the same in writing, signed by the jurors, setting forth who the person killed is, if known, and when, where, and by what means he or she came to his or death. And if he or she was killed, or his or her death was occasioned by the act of another by criminal means, who is guilty thereof, if known. So basically, state law says, yeah, inquests look at the issue of there were criminal means, right? Now, this is important nuance of this, right? An inquest is not a criminal trial. The jury doesn't come back with a verdict that says, we find this person guilty and therefore they shall be sentenced. But what does come out of this, and the state Supreme Court was clear on this today, was if this jury comes back and says, we found that there were criminal means, that becomes probable cause that's sent over to the prosecuting attorney, and they can file charges based upon that, okay?
This is like a big shakeup.
It is. It is.
What the process was before, right?
This is a big shakeup.
Maybe you can expand upon, how big the people are like, man, special report, this and that.
Yeah,
Maybe you can explain,
this is. And the court says, sort of near the beginning of its ruling, like everybody was partially right and partially wrong. Everybody got a little bit out of this. Families got a little bit. The officers got a little bit. Law enforcement, the cities got a little bit out of it. So nobody was perfectly right, nobody was perfectly wrong. It is a bit of a mix, but we have a definitive set of rules now about what the inquest rules are. So, just a couple more things here. So, can county appoint an inquest administrator that he or she can fire at will? Yes. The Supreme Court said, yep. There's no obvious reason why that would violate the appearance of fairness. So, Dow Constantine gets to do that. Can the county executive order inquest proceedings to be open to the public? Yes, absolutely. He can order them open to the public.
And were they closed before?
It was discretionary. It was discretionary, I think, up to the inquest administrator. I could be wrong about that. But now it's state Supreme Court just said it is up to the county executive or his or her delegate as to whether they should be open to the public. And then the question of, can the inquests of Damarius Butts, Charleena Lyles, Isaiah Obet, and the other folks in the inquests that should have happened within 18 months, can they still go, are they still timely? Can they still go forward? The state Supreme Court said, yes, absolutely. So those inquests are all going to go forward. They've been stayed for the last year while this whole, court case has gone on, but they're going to pick them up now and they're going to move them all forward.
Wow.
So there's a lot in that 49 pages, but some really, really important stuff.
What do you think? What's this going to look like now as far as these police agencies? I mean, clearly it's gone to the Supreme Court. There's nowhere else to go on this issue. But what's the ramifications or the repercussions now on these police agencies, especially the ones that were suing over this new inquest policy?
Well, I think it's going to be interesting. I think eventually there's going to be aspects of this which are, there are points of this which are kind of touched on, like in the SPOG contract and other places like that. Issues about, how do inquest processes work, to the extent that the city has any control over that, and that stuff is no longer fair game. The state Supreme Court has said what the law is, right? And that, and these aren't things that are going to be bargained, can be bargained away.
Oh, so this ruling now could impact the actual contract.
It could potentially, and probably more so for the King County Sheriff and the sheriff deputies than for SPD. But we'll have to see what happens with that, right? So there's that aspect of it. I think we'll probably see. We're certainly going to see a lot more evidence, and these inquests are going to be a lot more public, right? The court also said, kind of in a minor part that I didn't get to here, there's a question about whether they can, as part of an inquest, can they start the discovery process before the jury is impaneled for it? And the court said, yeah. So they can start, an inquest administrator, as soon as they're appointed, can start doing discovery and start collecting evidence where they couldn't necessarily do that before, right? So we're going to get a lot more evidence. We're going to have more people testifying. It's going to be a more complete, comprehensive process.
Let me ask you a question. The state law that the Supreme Court referred to in their ruling here to make these sweeping changes around the inquest process, these laws have been on the books for a long time. Like, has our inquest process here just been that way just because? Like, it could have always been something else?
Yeah, they didn't rewrite state law on this. The court just interpreted state law, right? This is kind of part of our court system, right? The superior courts have to hear cases. The first court of appeals in the state have to hear cases. But the Supreme Court is what they call discretionary. It chooses which cases it hears, right? So at the levels below it, you can have different courts making different decisions about how to interpret this stuff. And until it gets all the way up to the top of the Supreme Court, there's no definitive ruling about how these things are supposed to be interpreted.
I mean, this was a unanimous decision here
Unanimous decision, yeah.
And it was based upon existing law.
Existing law, yep.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of crazy to think that it's, like I said, as sweeping as these changes are here, that either a case that never got accepted by the Supreme Court, or people never challenged the court, or people never looked at the law, or whatever, that this is just interpretation of a law that was already there that's now transformed the way the inquests are going to move forward in King County.
And and it may be based upon this that some old inquests get reopened and run again. I don't know how that would work. Again, the part of the law says an inquest has to happen within 18 months, right? So I don't know what the courts would say if this new ruling by the state Supreme Court makes an old inquest look like it was improper. Would they be able to do it again? Or would the rule saying it has to be within 18 months prevent them from doing it again, right? I don't, in the case of a criminal case, they have this rule called double jeopardy, where you can't try somebody twice for the same thing. But this isn't a trial, right? We talked about before, this isn't a criminal trial, this is an inquest. So would the courts allow a rerun of one of these things if, based upon the state Supreme Court's ruling today, it found that a prior inquest had been done wrong. I don't know.
Now, the state law says that the inquest rules is basically comes down to the county executive,
Yep.
but that also means, so like King County have a different setup than Thurston County, than Pierce County. Do you think that there might be some kind of domino effect here in some of the counties across the state?
Certainly, probably the bigger ones. And I think, there's a reason it's up to the county executive, right? It's because not every county in this state is the same. Would you run the inquest process for a really small county the same way you'd run it for King County with 2.3 million people? In some ways, yeah, but in some ways, maybe not. I mean, maybe there are easier, better, certainly faster ways to get to the truth about something in a small county than in a big one. So giving some flexibility, some flexibility to county administrators to figure out the best way to do it, again, within the state law, has to be within the boundaries of what the state law says, is probably a good thing.
Right. And following this process here, how much do you think that the advocacy, I mean, when we talk about the three deceased here, in this case, Isaiah Obet, Damarius Butts, and of course, Charleena Lyles, and everybody knows that name, Charleena Lyles. And we've seen the advocacy of Katrina and other family members there. How much do you think like advocacy and pressure and everything else has moved this process forward? I think when Katrina, that full interview that we had there a year ago with Katrina is up on our website. We'll put the link in there right now. But what she was saying is when she first saw, she felt that she wasn't going to get any justice for Charleena, and that's what really, activated her, and she got behind all these other initiatives like a 940 and all these other things that are there. Is this a case of what we're seeing here? We're from the grassroots level, we're seeing these sweeping changes?
Well, it certainly affected Dow Constantine, right? That was one of the big reasons why he issued an executive order in the first place, right? So that he could respond to the grassroots feedback that he was getting. Now, the grassroots and activists and families weren't the only ones he was listening to. He was also hearing some complaints about the process from law enforcement and from cities, and he tried to incorporate some of that. So, I mean, he had a super challenging job, I will certainly grant him that, in trying to take everybody's feedback from all these different sides and come up with something that, he wanted to make everybody happy, and at the end made nobody happy with the thing, which is sort of how these things usually end up.
There's 39 cities, municipalities in King County. Why do you think that initially these four cities and the King County, the King County Sheriff is the sheriff of these additional 4 cities, why those 4 cities?
I mean, the easy short answer is they probably had pending inquests, right? I'm sure a lot of it had to do with the politics of their city attorney or chief attorney or whatever they call it in their particular jurisdiction, and what where they come out on the pro versus anti law enforcement spectrum, and where they are on police reform and how they felt about the process.
Wow. So next up is that the inquest process gets going then, right?
Yep, yeah. So there's going to be a little bit of paperwork that needs to be done. It has to go back down to Superior Court to officially, certify and bless some things, and then the Superior Court also stayed those inquests while this process went. So Superior Court now has to officially issue an order to unstay those inquests so they can move forward. So a few weeks on that, and then the thing can move forward. Yeah.
In the comments here, they're talking about implementation. They're like, yeah, well, this is the ruling, but it always gets sticky around implementation.
Yeah, so the county executive, Dow Constantine, will probably have to issue an updated version of his executive order. And I'm sure he probably has a lawyer working on it this afternoon, right, on trying to figure out what that's going to look like.
Right. We got a few comments here, or statements, and the first statement here is from the Lyles family. It's been a long wait, and we still don't know what happened to her. It won't bring her back, but hopefully it can begin the process of healing for our family. This will give closure to Charleena's children to know what really happened to their mom. We join with other families in this fight so that hopefully other people will not have to go through what we went through.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And, you know, just talking about the impact of this, there were 3 adults in the room when Charleena Lyles was shot, right? 2 police officers and Charleena Lyles. And now, because of the ruling today, those police officers will have to testify.
There it is. And also, on the comment or the issue of the inquest process and why it's important, and remember, this was a unanimous decision there in the Supreme Court. This is Justice Deborah Stevens. They empower community members to conduct thorough, transparent, and public death investigations, including when individuals like Damarius Butts, Isaiah Obet, and Charleena Lyles are shot and killed by police. In such instances, coroner's inquests can offer some measure of the accountability necessary to rebuild trust between law enforcement and the communities they serve. But that accountability depends on how the coroner's inquests are conducted.
Yeah, so Stevens is one of the more conservative members of the state Supreme Court. So the fact that, you know, she's making these kinds of statements is and you know, writing rulings like this is pretty significant, right? And you know, as you mentioned, it was unanimous. And you know, it was tough. Again, they wrote a ruling where everybody got something out of it. Again, not everybody's going to be happy with everything that's in there, but they, you know, found some merit with pieces of everybody's argument in this.
Wow, I mean, you just said something kind of amazing there, where you said that on Charleena Lyles' inquest, that these officers are going to have to testify.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's what the court said today, right? Now they can also have the chief of police come in and say, here's what the policy and training is for these officers, and they can have both sides can have expert witnesses come in and say, you know, these officers follow the policy and training, or they did not follow the policy or training, right? And the officers can testify as to what their mental state was. And we heard Dow Constantine talking about, you know, he believes that prejudices the outcome sometimes. Well, they're going to be able to do that. And it'll be up to the jury to decide how they interpret all that information.
All right, good stuff. Before we wrap up here, what are some of the takeaways you want to leave with our audience?
You know, I think coming back to something I said earlier, I think this is hopefully, you know, if all goes well, going to end up with an inquest process that's more comprehensive. We get more of the information. We hear from everybody, right? There aren't these artificial limits on this. It may end up taking longer, right? Discovery is going to take longer. Talking to everybody is going to take, there's going to be more witnesses. There's going to be more evidence to go through. So, you know, don't be surprised if inquests actually take longer to go from beginning to end through this because of these decisions, because the court said every person, they've got to summon and hear from every person who has knowledge of the facts. And that, you know, so justice might not be as swift, right? But it's probably going to be more comprehensive because of this.
All right, good stuff. We're going to put this article up right here on the screen, and you can find this at, we got a motion graphic over there. There we go.
There you
State Supreme Court clarifies rules for King County inquest, allows pending inquest to move forward. That's written by you, Kevin Schofield, right there. That guy again. And we put the link to that article there in the comments. Man, I want to thank you for taking the time and coming over here to the studio. You know, it's important because this stuff, a lot of stuff hits the news, and just the nature of a lot of news here is no one's able to kind of talk things out in a more wordy and nerdy kind of way like you. So it's always good to be able to try to give people in the community as much information as possible.
And I know, you know, I always appreciate when you give me a chance to be wordy and nerdy and to help just like talk this through so we can all really understand what the, you know, what a 49-page ruling from the state Supreme Court really says. So thank you.
All right, my guy. Look, we're going to get out of here back again tomorrow morning at 11 a.m. for the Morning Update Show. Until then, peace.
I did it for the city, I did it for the love, I did it for the people, I did it for us. Back on this rap ish, I ain't even
even broke a sweat, homie, this practice. Pondering my next move, staring at my track list, hope I ain't miss my window. Praying like a Baptist, Seattle's own. Tired of this Game of Thrones. They made a list of the best rappers, and guess who wasn't on? While the disrespect continues, I'm steady packing these venues.
Converge Media produces culturally relevant content for Black and urban audiences. Our coverage is raw, transparent, and objective, praised by community leaders, government officials, and residents. Support Converge Media today via Venmo, Cash App, or PayPal at Converge Media.